Okay, we're going to get going. Ladies, gentlemen, Your Excellency, thank you very much. We're now going live, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome all of you who are at home or in the office around the world, wherever you are at the moment. Thank you. There are nearly 200 of you, I believe, joining us live, and to welcome everybody in the room. A very warm welcome to the Royal Town Planning Institute's Race to Net Zero, why we need to plan the world we need. We're absolutely thrilled to be hosting this event, and I understand for many of you it may be your first event of COP26, and we're absolutely delighted we've been able to deliver this in a hybrid approach so that many of our friends, colleagues and partners can join us from around the world. We've utilised the convening power of the Royal Town Planning Institute in the spirit of collaboration and partnership to bring together our friends and allies on this very special day, the 72nd World Town Planning Day. And I appreciate for our colleagues watching this from down under, that day started some time ago yesterday, but we're stretching out the day in special commemoration that it combines this year with the COP. To make the most of this most brilliant opportunity afforded by the spotlight of COP26, we want to showcase the work of planners and planning to show what an important role it is playing and will continue to play in delivering on net zero and tackling climate change. I should have, of course, introduced myself. Perhaps you can see that on the slide, but I'm Victoria Hills. I'm the Chief Executive of the Royal Town Planning Institute, and apologise if there are any nerves, which will soon go, because this is my first hybrid event, and we're delighted that so many of you could join it, both here in person, but also down the line. We're delighted to be working with, this is my first test, here we go, with all of these fantastic organisations, the Global Planners Network, the Commonwealth Association of Planners, the International Society of City and Regional Planners, and so much more. And what that really demonstrates, I hope now, to all of those watching this, is the real strength when we can work together collaboratively, globally, to convene, utilising the convening power of planning to tackle some of the big challenges that are facing us today and in the future. Now, in a truly collaborative and inclusive way, we will be accepting questions and encouraging questions. Indeed, we've already had some come through already, but we will be using Slido. Now, for those of you watching at home, you've probably already seen that box in the right hand of your screen. And indeed, I know some of you have, because my app on the phone has already shown me the brilliant first question. So thank you for that. Keep asking away. For those of you in the room, you will see a slide now that takes you directly to the website, and all you have to do is enter that code and your questions will get through too. We won't be taking in-person questions in the room to make this as fair for everybody, because I know, looking around the calibre of the organisations and individuals represented, we're going to have a fantastic discussion and some fascinating questions ahead. So, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, who is going to set out her thoughts on the role of planning, planners, and what we can do working together to deliver on net zero. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Maemuna Sheriff, who is the Executive Director of UN Habitat. Maemuna, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thank you so much for the introductions and also for these invitations. distinguished guests, partners, friends, fellow planners, ladies and gentlemen. I always say that when I'm among the planners, I feel at home. Yes, well, now is the time for us to rethink. I also would like to join you today for the celebration of World Town Planning Day, which is focusing on the planning for intergenerational equity. And in my country, in Malaysia, today there's also celebrating 100 years of town planning in Malaysia. So since I was also a planner in Malaysia and also a mayor for 7 years before I took over as an executive director of UN Habitat since 2018 and up to now. So now we are in COP26. The world faces global crisis like climate change and pandemic. Planning for sustainable and equitable communities requires both long-term thinking and immediate thinking. And our thinking and our rethinking about what we call about build back better, green recovery is very, very important. I think this is very, very timely. The COVID-19 shows the weaknesses of the existing system and also give us the opportunity to see the world in another perspective. So we are here today and carrying the message from and with the world planning professional and how to unlock and build back better cities and communities, to rethink together how to deliver a lasting and sustainable recovery from the current climate and pandemic crisis of our cities. It is my pleasure today to say that we have learned and shared effectively and with commitment to identify innovative and effective responses. I have the opportunity to travel as an ED of UN Habitat, and I have seen the urban sprawl. I have seen the places where 800 million people is still living in slum. You can imagine that living in slum with no basic services, no water, no electricity, and sometimes no food on the table. And I would like to share with you, I like to share with you this one incident when I went to a place called Burkina Faso. And I went there and I visited this area. And I've seen that a group of ladies waiting 2 hours just to collect water, drinking water. And at that time during COVID. So don't ask them to wash their hand. And you know, I felt that I have the video how to wash the hand properly, you know, under this. And they don't even have water to drink. And they have to wait 2 hours to get 1 barrel of water and carry it on the head. And mostly women and children. Carry 1 barrel of water and walk 2 to 3 kilometers to their home. There is no electricity in the area. And you can imagine that is in Africa when there's no electricity, it's totally dark. And I met the community leaders there. And they said that because they cannot pronounce my name, Maemuna, they call me Ed. Ed, please get us street lightings because there are so many unwanted pregnancies in this area and because of crime. And this is, they don't talk about the pollution in other cities because in Africa, urbanization, and in Asia, the urbanization rate is very, very fast. I think it's the highest in the continent, in Africa, in Asia. So I think this is what is our role, to build back better, to recover, and leaving no one behind. And then it's leaving no space behind. So we know about that, but what is our role? I'm not talking to you, I'm also talking to myself. Yeah, I'm reminding myself, so what is our role and my role here when we talk about the green recovery, talk about this, because every minute, 150 people added to the city globally. Every minute. By the end of this, our program, 2 hours today, you can calculate that every minute, 150 people added into the cities. And every hour, 200,000. So this is how we can be, the city's been stressed. in terms of this provision of basic services. So I think this is very, very important that we work together. We are working on the double track when it comes to addressing the recovery from the pandemic, and we are also addressing the key priorities when it comes to climate crisis. So on one side, we work to elevate the urban and territorial planning as key tools for sustainable development, and this effort is one of which we very much welcome a long-term partnership with ISOCAP and hope to continue to jointly work to develop strong messages, policy advice to illustrate impact and opportunities. On the other hand, we are also aware that revisiting, reconceptualizing our approaches is needed and unescapable if we want to work at the intersection of crises that we presently face for humanity. Health, pandemic one, the climate change, this one, the financial at the local level, and we wish to tackle that the overall, if we wish to tackle the overall economics and social crises, which are so intrinsically linked to those. So I think planners playing a very crucial role in looking into the integrated approach. I always bring forward this integrated approach of tackling the climate change, the climate crisis. I think being a planners, we lead to the land use planning, we lead to environmental planning. So I always mention, even in my opening remark or in my intervention during the COP, you cannot take climate change by itself without link it into the planning, into the land use planning, into the resources planning, and also at the end of the day to involve the local community, the mayors on the ground. Not because I was a mayor before, but I understand that there is no vertical and horizontal integration. It is very difficult to implement. What I meant is vertical is that from the global to the national to the regional to sub-regional, and the horizontal is where the private sector, is where the communities, is young people, and the others. I think this is very, very important to have the vertical and horizontal integration in order to tackle. They heard about that. I think we heard in the COP26, the financial is there, the finance is there. That's what I heard. They say, oh, they have the finance there, but it's not trickled down to the most vulnerable, the target groups on the ground. What happened? Why the system is failed in that sense? I think this is also very, very important for us as planners to think and also to rethinking about this. Indeed, it is critical that we rethink. In a planning approach, 5 key issues I would like to share with you. One is inclusiveness and empowerment. I think this is very, very important. Well-being and health, smartness and development, resilience and adaptability, and uniqueness and connectivity. We have to connect the dot for the people to live, work, and play. So I think this is also important. And all of us and all of this have been impacted by the pandemic and become very critical for recovery to address the climate change. And yet, while we have many ideas and solutions, bringing them to scale and integrating them effectively still remain a major challenge. And I myself is also facing a major challenge to have this. We have the solution, but how can we work together with the partners, development partners, and also the mayors on the ground, and in terms of the giving them the software and the hardware. Software, what I meant is that the role of the planners in terms of the capacity building, the delivering the knowledge to the local government. Sometimes they have the hardware. When you talk about the smart city, I always promote it should be demand drive, not supply drive. You know, it should be the demand from the local authority, not the supply driven. It should be demand driven, people centered. I think this is very, very important for us to see that, because we need all hands on deck to move from the lessons we are learning and innovation we are testing to scale and impact. And from our study that 70% of the infrastructure that is needed by 2050 is not built yet now. So I think that is the role of our planners, the role of the other professional planners, engineers, architects, to think, we used to say that green recovery, green building, green architecture, green planning. So what is it all about? So I think this is the 75% that we are going to build. We are going to construct, mostly maybe by the government, private sector. I think the role of the planners to intervene and then to check and then also to give ideas and innovation, because the people out there need us. So looking at the perspective of our past and ongoing work, all the learning and experience that we have all together in this room, I think can provide us with incredible rich new material and ideas and additional clarity on what can be the contribution of planners to the future of cities and settlement as we build more resilient communities. I've been asked by the Secretary General to chair the task force for the future cities. I think I need your help. What is the future cities will look like? I've been asked to chair a task force called Future Cities. I've been asked also to chair the local 2030 coalition, meaning that how we can look into the localization of the SDG. So I also need help. Maybe during Q&A, maybe we can give some ideas. What is you think that the future cities should be? So this is very, very important for us. And then I think this is also for us to see that we need to look ahead at the recovery, which need to be better and more sustainable, ensuring that we leave no one behind or no space behind. So I just came from been asked to speak at one of the indigenous program, nature-based solution and technology. I think there is a lot of things that we can learn from our forefathers about the when we talk about nature-based solution, when we talk about local resources, local material. So I think this is one areas that we should look into that. So the coming months will be very exciting and extremely challenging from planning perspective, and the urgency of doing the right things is clear. The stake of wasting time and opportunities are very, very high. So I think the call to action is now. So UN Habitat is committed to a healthier, greener, and more sustainable urbanization, and we support the application of long and short-term intervention to guide the process towards healthier and climate-neutral environment, in particular providing evidence-based approach, ensuring that local, national leaders and professionals have the knowledge, guidance, and tool to integrate climate, health, and well-being into their urban development decision program, plans, and processes. Second, we also promote an integrated planning approach, expand relationship between sectors which involve planning, health, environment, and social well-being for better coordination and effectiveness. Third, we also support reform of the planning system. And out there are still a lot of countries we have no proper planning system. Or if they have the planning system, it's already archaic. If they have also, we need to review the planning system to suit the what we call it, the new normal of doing things. So I think that's the role of the planners is very important to look at the legislation. So it's also to ensure that the guiding principle for planning more sustainable cities and contained in the new urban agenda. Please look back at the new urban agenda and look back at the sustainable development goal, the 17, and 64% of the target of the sustainable development goals are in cities. So people used to say that the SDG will be won or lost in cities, because it's more than half is to be in cities. Who are these planners playing a role? So indeed, planners are already producing knowledge, tools, and ideas. And this Congress has been very excellent showcase, and I therefore call upon all the participants, colleagues, all the planners to further document and apply these lessons and build partnership to put ideas into action. And we all need planners and planning to live up to the challenges and to participate in the public debate and also pursuing the excellent innovation and in their work and research. So looking forward to continue this travel together. Today, I congratulate the World Planning Institute and celebrate all jointly efforts to build our cities better and stronger. And let me reiterate that UN Habitat's commitment to working with all of you to make urban environment an ever more resilient, equal, livable, and friendly places for all of us. And I would like to share with you my I just developed this. I would like to share with you, and after that you give me a comment. 5R approach. We have to rethink how we consume, how we live as an individual. If we want to change, we have to change ourselves first. As an individual, we must admit that our planet is finite and stop eating ourselves out of our habitable planet in this known universe. That is one, rethink as ourselves. Second, we have to reprioritize the way we plan to ensure economic, social, cultural environment and spatial planning become more integrated, and cities design move from the mindset that seek to conquer the nature to value-based approach or nature-based approach that is focused their well-being. So GDP is not only the measure for everything. This one, during this COP 2026, I have these 5 points. I just want to share with you, and you give your comments. Revisit our social contract between leaders, citizen leaders, and custodian. We must be the custodian, not the masters. We need new social contract to ensure that adaptation measures can be truly realized based on the human right approach. Another one is review. Review the way we finance urban development to ensure that equity and inclusiveness is the key outcome. And we want that the policy that shift from we are developing result in financing and the profit impact on the ground. Regenerate, that is the last R, regenerate our cities and communities by giving space to local stakeholders, businesses, youth, women participant in cities making. Without them, I think we cannot hope that our cities will be more resilient. All these 5R can be implemented into 4P, public, private, people partnership. Thank you so much.
Well, Your Excellency, thank you for such an excellent opening keynote and really got us thinking so much about the future, and the questions are now flooding in. Lovely to see. Without further ado, we must move on. We've got a fantastic panel, as you can see, assembled here to join in the discussion. So without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to President Wei Yang, this year's President of the Royal Town Planning Institute. Thank you very much, Wei.
Thank you, Victoria. Hi, good evening, everyone. Either you join virtually or here today with us. Thank you for joining the RTPI Fringe event in COP26. First of all, before I start my speech, I really want to say thank you to Her Excellency, our Director General from the UN Habitat. She's a good personal friend as well. I remember last time when I saw her was 2 years ago when I stood for election, was during the election process. So I said, I stood for election, I might be the RTPI president in the future. And then the last word she said to me was best of luck. So I'm really delighted here as the president of the RTPI, I can welcome her in person. And Maemuna, she's such an excellent advocate for planning and for women leadership on the world stage. So she's truly a true role model for all of the planners. So couldn't we have a better opportunity to welcome her and then to hear her contributions and her thoughts on the World Town Planning Day. So thank you very much for joining us. So I'm really glad today we have this opportunity to join forces with many different planning institutes around the world. Actually, when I'm in COP26 in the main conference, I do feel a strong sense of urgency, and also there's a strong willingness between different countries, between different professionals to collaborate. So I think it's really great. We are now in a race to accelerate climate change and actions to tackle the climate change and natural decline. So transformative changes are needed now by any profession and by everyone around the world. And we have all of our own both professional responsibilities and also our personal responsibilities as citizens. And we must take our professional responsibility seriously. But I think before we start to raise our actions, I think we need to ask some fundamental questions. The first question is why we need to plan the world we need. That's because our world has a planetary boundary, the ecological limits of the planet. These limits have fundamental impacts on our economies, livelihood, food security, health, quality of life worldwide. And to be frank, it's really about our survival. Spatial planning, it deals with our relationship with natural and built environment. It has the ability to develop a long-term vision and framework for citizens that considers multiple scales, balancing competing demands, and also directing resource allocation decisions. So that's what planners will do. And also, I think the second question we need to ask is, for whom do we plan? We plan for nature, we plan for people, and we plan for the future. Our clients are not directly the clients actually paying us. Actually, our clients are the people using the space we're planning for. So actually, we plan for the general public. So the fundamental objective of the planning profession is to create a balanced system for people, nature, and society to coexist in harmony. The climate emergency and the biodiversity decline are two sides of the same coin, and there is direct linkage between them and the pandemic. Nature has to be our first priority. If the right approach is taken, we can find a high nature and a low carbon solution. So we need a strategic, long-term, urban-rural integrated approach which considers the whole territory as one ecological entity. Everything is part of a holistic, integrated, and interconnected ecosystem. Last Monday, the first day of the COP26, after the award ceremony, I asked the little girl, if you notice her, she was in the opening ceremony, Delphin. She was the winner of the Blue Peters Our Planet Now competition. The animation showed during the opening ceremony was inspired by her award in front of all the leaders. So I asked her why town planning is important for children. And then actually, I was quite surprised because sometimes even you talk with some people about town planning, they will ask what town planning is about. But actually for her, she didn't really even ask, and she knew what town planning was about. And she said town planning is important because children need a nice place to live. And also they need to know what the world really looks like. And they need to, so as adults, as town planners, we need to preserve the world for them. So the children, they have the opportunity to look at in the future. So she got all the essence because planning is really about the future. It is also very true that our future generations have the right to enjoy nature as much as we do. We need to leave them a place in harmony with nature. Last year, the RTPI launched a major campaign, Plan the World We Need. The campaign and its supporting paper brought confidence to society and illustrated a positive roadmap on how the planning profession can contribute to a sustainable, resilient, inclusive recovery from COVID-19. For COP26, the RTPI published a globally focused research paper, Urban Planning After COVID-19, Supporting a Global Sustainable Recovery. We have the executive summary on your table. You can have a look. And then if we can turn to the next slide about the report, you can see what the cover look like. So it complements the RTPI's ongoing work to understand how planners are responding to the challenges presented by COVID-19 pandemic and our engagement with COP26. The report reflects on the current situation and more importantly, highlights what needs to change and how can we do things differently to tackle climate change as well as other grand challenges of our times. The recently published UN Environment Programme Emission Gaps report starkly shows that the new national climate pledges, combined with other mitigation measures, put the world on the track for a global temperature rise of 2.7 degrees by the end of this century. This is well above the goals of the Paris Climate Agreement to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees over pre-industrial levels and will lead catastrophic changes to the Earth's climate. The UN Secretary General has articulated the reason for this failure. The emissions gap is the result of a leadership gap. In my view, the leadership gap needs to be filled both politically and professionally. COP26 has a clear agenda to engage and convince global political and business leaders to take urgent climate crisis. What shouldn't be forgotten is the power of professionals in creating a valid range of practical solutions that effectively underpin measurable actions. The best COP26 outcome is to align the climate actions around the world for one goal, to save our planet, our shared world. Currently, there is a global vacuum to be filled by a profession to take the lead and enable built and natural environment professions to tackle the multiple crises we face and to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I believe that role must be taken by town planners. Why? Because the vast amount of research and studies for decades about climate change and biodiversity decline are calling for one thing: utilizing place-based spatial planning in a long-term, strategic, multidisciplinary, and systems approach can be a transformative solution to coordinate efforts from different professionals to achieve our overall mission of controlling climate change within the same limit. It is also the most direct way to influence human activities and lifestyles. World-leading scientists have pointed out that treating climate, biodiversity, and human society as coupled systems is key to successful outcomes from policy interventions. So I believe it is time for the planning profession to take a leadership role in forging a common and collective sense of purpose with other good forces in our wider society. Our proposition has stated in the recently published guidance by the RTPI and the TCPA, The Climate Crisis, a guide for local authorities on planning for climate change. We said planning is a key part of our national survival system. It should be embed the principles at all levels. Nothing should be planned without having successfully demonstrated it is fit to take its place in a net zero emission future. As planners, we are also concerned that the effects of climate change will disproportionately affect the most vulnerable individuals around the world. We believe utilizing planning system properly can prevent this. Also, many of the actions necessary to tackle the climate crisis are also key in creating healthy, ecologically rich, prosperous, and beautiful places for us and for our future generations. So we need green, collaborative, creative, smart, and inclusive actions to resolve multifaceted challenges. Utilizing a place-based systems approach, spatial planning plays a vital role to enable and coordinate these actions. Working in silos and non-place-based policies will lead us to a dead end, a catastrophe. As an applied social, environmental, and behavioral science, spatial planning synthesizes a variety of prospects and approaches and is the glue that binds built and natural environment expertise together to create a better future for public interest. Today is the 72nd World Town Planning Day. I'm really delighted we have this opportunity to present this report to you about how town planning should be advanced. It highlighted that taking a holistic approach, town planning can improve many of the key areas to tackle climate change and at the same time support a global sustainable recovery after COVID-19. This could include integrating housing, health, and well-being in tackling place-based inequality, enabling a green industrial revolution, ensuring inclusive connectivity through low-carbon infrastructure. We believe that a commitment to climate justice and disadvantaged communities should be at the starting point of all urban planning activity. Also, to empower and enable this, we have emphasized 4 areas of focus for policy and actions, including governance and resource, drawing up national and local strategies, common objectives and metrics, data and technology. All in all, we need a reimagining of planning. I think planning profession is a profession we have a solution to offer to tackle all the grand challenges we have now. Planning should expand its scope to include place-based system thinking into plan-making, looking at the local and global, social and environmental implications of urban development So we cannot think urban development on its own right. We really have to think about urban development, its consequence for the future, and also its bigger context related to the nature. And also it should support society in instrumentalizing the lessons learned and to growth within our planetary boundaries. So I'm full of hope for our profession. I have no doubt the heyday of the planning profession is coming. I hope you have an enjoyable evening. I look forward to working with you all to unlock the full potential of the planning profession to plan the world we need. Thank you very much.
President Yang, thank you very much for a very thoughtful presentation. And as you know, this evening we want to broaden out the conversation to look at best practice around the globe. And so I'm delighted that we're joined in person and virtually by some of the other organisations that we work very closely with. Now, it has been noted on the questions how wonderful it is to see an all-female panel here this evening, and I hope that that hasn't passed you by. However, in the spirit of inclusivity, we do also work with men, and I'm very, very delighted that we've got a couple of short films now that I'm going to introduce our next speakers to provide some of those global perspectives. So, without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Leo Asuncion, who is president of the American Planning Association. We work very closely with our friends and colleagues over across the pond, as we like to say. And for those of you who have tuned in now, perhaps a little earlier in your day, thank you very much for joining us. So without further ado, let's watch the film.
Hello, I'm Leo Asuncion, President of the American Planning Association. APA currently represents nearly 40,000 planners that work throughout the United States, its territories, and even abroad. Climate change is one of the most important challenges of the 21st century. While it is a global challenge that we all have to tackle, it requires both local action and local solutions. That is why planners are poised to help provide communities with a variety of solutions to meet emission reduction goals. Planners are the only professionals working at the intersection of transportation, development, land use, and community engagement. We can help communities meet and exceed their emission reduction goals, and APA strongly supports its members in the climate fight. Earlier this year, APA ratified our new climate change policy guide. This guide represents APA's official position on climate change, and it arms planners with guidance to empower communities for a safe, more resilient, and carbon-free future. I'd like to highlight 3 areas from the guide where planners are taking local action to help their communities move forward in achieving their climate goals. First, planners are working to create a livable built environment. To achieve this, in the United States, we must rethink past planning practices, develop or redevelop the built environment, and eliminate barriers standing in our way. One area where APA is leading efforts is through zoning reform. In 2019, it was estimated that 75% of residential land in the US was zoned for single-family residences. This has led to both a shortage of available and financially accessible housing. Residents moved further away from the city center to find and afford housing, which resulted in urban sprawl and placed a greater emphasis on the use of personal automobiles to get to jobs, schools, and stores. Minneapolis, Minnesota became a leader in addressing the housing availability and affordability shortage. The city's comprehensive plan, Minneapolis 2040, now allows for a denser mix of buildings near the city center. This expands housing options and helps contribute to the fight against climate change. Multifamily housing units create a smaller carbon footprint and enable more residents to walk or use the city's public transportation networks. The second way APA and planners in the United States are working to address climate change is by creating a built environment that is in harmony with nature. APA advocates the use of nature-based solutions and green infrastructure to reduce harmful impacts from climate change. These efforts can help address hazards like flooding and erosion and help mitigate the impacts of urban heat, improve air quality, and reduce stormwater runoff. In fact, heat kills more people in the United States than all other weather hazards combined. New York City's Cool Neighborhoods program aims to keep communities safe in extreme heat. The program incorporates both mitigation and adaptation strategies. One such mitigation effort is implementing cool roofs to reduce energy use. Since the program's start in 2009, it has lowered cooling costs and reduced an estimated 2,680 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in the city. The third way APA and planners are working to address climate change is by removing barriers to new sustainable energy sources. Federal and state tax incentives and reduced installation costs have accelerated interest in renewable energy sources such as solar. In 6 years, the number of grid-connected solar facilities in the United States with a capacity of at least 1 megawatt grew from roughly 1,200 to 4,500. APA's Solar at Scale Guidebook helps planners work with communities to plan for new large-scale solar projects while reducing the soft costs for permitting processes. The guidebook takes users through planning for and maximizing success of large-scale solar developments. Gold Hill, Colorado, located in the eastern foothills of the Rocky Mountains, wants to increase the resilience of its energy system and mitigate the impacts of climate change. The town did a feasibility study to assess the technical, economic, and regulatory options of several different approaches to implement resilient, low-carbon electric power infrastructure. It hopes to create a scalable and replicable approach for other mountain communities to follow. Of the 3 examples I mentioned today, only with the other efforts undertaken by US planners, it is vital that climate actions are equitable. We cannot allow vulnerable populations to bear the burden of climate change. As planners, we must ensure that all members of the community have access to opportunity and benefit from efforts to mitigate the impacts of climate change.
Thank you very much, Leo. If you're watching this live from Hawaii, I should say, I believe Leo is based. That was a round of applause. You may not have picked that up on the microphone, but thank you very much. We're now going to move to another continent, and we are heading to the South African Council for Planners. So I'm delighted we now have a film from Martin Lewis, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the South African Council for Planners. Let's watch the film.
It has been acknowledged that climate change is said to have far-reaching impacts on our country, South Africa. My name is Martin Lewis. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the South African Council for Planners, SACPlan. It has been accepted that South Africa as a country needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve energy efficiency. Our State President of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, in his 2021 State of the Nation address, indicated that we cannot lose sight of the threat that climate change poses to our environmental health, social economic development, and economic growth. He indicated that we are working to fulfill our commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement, which include the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. He indicated that Eskom, the energy provider within South Africa, our largest greenhouse gas emitter, has committed in principle to net zero emissions by 2050 and to increase its renewable capacity. The President further indicated that the Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change will work on a plan for a just transition towards a low-carbon economy and climate-resilient society. The National Development Plan of South Africa indicates that South Africa is not only a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, it is particularly vulnerable to the effects of climate change on health, livelihoods, water, and food, with a disproportionate impact on the poor, especially women and children. While adapting to these changes, industries and households have to reduce their negative impact on the environment. This will require far-reaching changes to the way people live and work. The objective set in the National Development Plan is to achieve the peak, plateau, and decline trajectory for greenhouse gas emissions, with the peak being reached around 2025. The National Spatial Development Framework indicates that one of the interventions would be for existing regional planning through regional planning spatial development framework processes to focus on green energy generation. When we plan and prepare for climate change, we should not only plan in and for the areas themselves, but also for the knock-on effects of climate change in other parts of the country and in neighboring countries. The legislative framework is in place within South Africa. Section 24 of the Constitution of South Africa indicates that everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, and to have an environment protected for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislation and other measures that prevent pollution and ecological degradation, to promote conservation and secure ecologically sustainable development and use of natural resources while promoting justifiable economic and social development. Chapter 2 of the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Act of 2013 sets out a number of development principles. These development principles must guide spatial planning, land use management, and land development within South Africa. These principles apply to all organs of state and authorities responsible for regulating the use and development of land. A number of the principles, such as the principle of spatial sustainability, the principle of efficiency, and the principle of spatial resilience, if properly addressed, would assist in achieving net zero. There are other pieces of legislation that also directly or indirectly addresses the protection of the environment, but I will not be dwelling on these now. To achieve spatial sustainability, to achieve efficiency, to achieve spatial resilience, and to ultimately achieve net zero, we should ensure that properly qualified and registered planners are employed in the positions responsible for the urban and regional planning function. Qualified urban and regional planning professionals are equipped to influence policy as well as decisions that would assist in achieving net zero. As a result, we would be able to develop plans that are holistic, integrated, and resourced for delivery. Planners have and can play a vital role in reinventing planning. Planners will be able to highlight the critical role and opportunities of urban, regional, and rural areas to address climate change. The path to net zero would be a challenging one for South Africa. Ms. Manamela, the interim CEO of the South African National Energy Development Institute, indicated that there is commitment by major decision makers to achieve targets set in the report Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap to the economy, the Global Energy Sector Report. And this was also highlighted earlier by the comment that I made, or the reference that I made to our president. The CEO of Eskom, Mr. Andre de Ruyter, indicated that we have an opportunity, the groundwork for a cleaner and greener electricity supply industry. As planners, we should not be caught off guard when the planning and the applications for the cleaner and greener electricity supply industry starts to roll in and the development starts to roll out, and that we must prepare in advance for such. Within the property environment, the Green Building Council of South Africa has launched a net zero building certification. The Green Building Council of South Africa is the 5th Green Building Council to launch a net zero building certification. The goal set by the World Green Building Council's Advancing Net Zero project is that all buildings to be net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Here again, planners must prepare themselves for alternative methods and development requirements to achieve net zero. We should not be the blockage that prolongs the achievement of net zero. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and to all our friends and colleagues joining from South Africa, you're very welcome. And that was a round of applause, Martin, which you may not pick up on the microphone. We move now to a broader perspective across nations. I'm delighted that we're joined in person by Kelly Moore, who is the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Association of Planners. Kelly, you're very welcome. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's a great honor for me to be here tonight. And a special thank you to RTPI for hosting this event and bringing together all of the planners. Happy World Town Planning Day. I have to say that it's really an honor to be here. And I don't know about you, but I feel something really amazing is about to happen. There's sort of this, I was talking earlier with a colleague about sort of these pockets of awareness and change and collective commitment to improving the way things are, and I sort of feel that that is happening. And I don't know about you in terms of the presentations that we've heard tonight, but it does sort of seem like there's this groundswell, and the world that we're living in today won't be the world that we're living in tomorrow. It's going to be a better world because we'll have found how to plan sustainably in a way that does allow us to have net zero and move forward. It's really the only way. So I want to first thank Peter Orborn, he's a vice president with the Commonwealth Association of Architects, who has helped to put all the slides together for this presentation. And I also want to acknowledge Alice Preston Jones. She's sitting here today, and she was one of the certainly the brains and the legs behind what I'm about to talk about in terms of the Commonwealth Sustainable Cities Initiative. Really, without her assistance in bringing this material together, it wouldn't have been possible. And they've let me loose with the material. It's my first time running through it, so hopefully I can do it some justice. But I'm about to put some numbers together for you of what you're hearing tonight in terms of why we need to take collective action now. So I will begin. So there was a survey that was done in 2019, released in 2020, and it was a survey of built environment professionals, and it sort of lays the foundation for the work I'm about to explain to you and what really kind of was preempting the Commonwealth Sustainable Cities Initiative. And I'll be talking about it a little bit further, but you'll see this slide come up a few times. So we're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, and the work that has been done around the Built Environment Survey has really kind of focused in on the fact that there are an interconnection between all of the different SDGs. As you can see in this web, we really can't move forward unless on one item unless we move forward together. And as you can see, if we think about, of course, the sustainable cities and communities, you can see that it's linked to absolutely every other SDG. And so the work that we're doing every day matters to our achievement in all of the other areas. And in fact, if we go a little bit further, 65% of the 169 SDG goals link back to sustainable urbanization and communities. So it's very important. The work that you're hearing here around some of the good projects that are happening, whether it's in the United States or it's in South Africa, or Her Excellency has spoke, there's good work that is happening as well as our president of RTPI. But it's really critical. We, as planners, are leaders in this work, and the work that we're going to do is going to affect all of these other areas. And that's why it's important we're working across nations. We've heard already around climate change and the importance of climate change and how we're trying to move, be sustainable to be able to avert some of this climate growth, global warming and the effects of that. And more specifically here, you can see that as the world urbanization, and I'm just going to glance, it's my slides, I can't see them in the reflection as we thought we might be able to, so I just need to pop over here. That as you can see, of course, the areas that are most urbanizing right now have had the least population growth. So we are going to see some changes in terms of urbanization and growth that's happening. So areas that have predominantly been the ones that have accelerated growth, whether it's Europe or North America, for example, those ones are going to start to slow, and we're going to see growth in other areas. And you're going to get some good examples of that here right away. So this should be, oh, sorry, there we go. And so in terms of growth, we've heard the date 2050 be spoke of tonight. Well, that's because by 2050, at the rate that we're going right now, the population will grow by another more than 2 billion people. And more than 50% of that growth will be in the Commonwealth. But really the unique story here, the hidden story, is that more than 50% of that growth is not going to be where you think it's going to be, which is in the large urban centers. In fact, it's going to be in the smaller secondary cities, those 500,000 and less, and often those that don't have the same infrastructure to be able to support the growth or to have the professional network and so on there to be able to support that. So this is an example of floor area. So if we think about built environment and if we keep growing in the way that we're growing currently, you can see that there's going to be some changes happening here where the amount of floor area in Africa and Asia is going to start to surpass those areas that are already developed. So you think about it, all of the land area that exists, built area that exists today in terms of buildings, there will be more of it in the future, but in other parts of the world than there are. So really a redistribution, and it's really quite stark if you think about all that development that'll happen. And when we think about vulnerability and climate risk here, so you can see that the areas that are most vulnerable to climate change, so in particular Africa and Asia, they're also the most vulnerable in terms of the severity of the incidences related to climate change. And so, of course, you can see, the larger the dot, the higher the population there. And then just looking at CO2 emissions and gross national income, here we can see that the areas that have the highest gross national income also have the highest CO2 emissions. And then as we look further, of course, in terms of the rates of urbanization, the areas that are going to be undergoing the most significant development pressure, so when we spoke about floor areas, so if you look at Africa or if you look at Asia, they're going to be the areas that are going to be urbanizing the most quickly. And why does that matter? Well, we know that cities produce 70% of the carbon emissions. So if we continue on the path that we're on now, and the growth continues in the way that it does, we're going to have more development in these areas than we do currently, and it's going to be occurring in areas with lower income and gross national income to be able to have, we think about, I'll get to this slide actually. I don't want to get ahead of myself, so I'll pause there. So in the survey of built environment professionals, we worked with, of course, planners as well as architects, land surveyors, and engineers, and surveyed them to see kind of what the issues were that they were dealing with, their continuous professional development, their building codes, their planning legislation. So I'm just going to touch on that right now. And that was across the Commonwealth. And so you're not expected to read this, but what you need to know is the areas in red are areas that don't have those professional services in place. So you can see the different columns represent architects, engineers, planners, and surveyors. And those areas where I just showed you that the greatest urbanization is going to occur or have the lowest income are the areas that have the least professional supports in place to be able to support that population growth. And just to give some further context, and for example, the UK, I think, which is the one at the top on the chart there, that essentially per capita, you can see that there are per 1,000 people, there's approximately 0.6 architects. And then as you go down, you can see there's 0.0005, for the Gambia, again, an area experiencing growth. Well, when we look at planners, it's even less. So those that are responsible for land use planning, looking at regulations and development regulations, it gets more stark. And then when we look at continued professional development, there is some work happening there, but we want to be able to get these charts to being able to show 100%, where in fact people have access to continuous learning. They have access to peers and mentorship, to new educational opportunities. There's some gaps there that we clearly need to fill. And then the same thing with the built environment policy. This is probably one of the key areas where we're going to have to do some work. So we can see, for example, in the planning legislation, we have 71% reporting that they have legislation that's ready for implementation or for purpose. But in reality, they're saying only 42% are able to effectively do that. So that's a large portion of people responding that aren't able to be able to do the jobs that they're there to do. And the same thing, and part of that is being taken seriously and so on. There's some data here that I'm just going to touch on that. And the same thing with building codes. And then in speaking on building codes here, you can see this is a map, a global map that looks at building energy codes by country. And so really the areas in blue, you can see it's mandatory for every sector, but every other part of that map is either mandatory for part of the sector, or you'll see that it's voluntary, or they don't exist at all in the dark and light gray. So some of the feedback we received in the survey really talked about the challenges overall for professions as a whole. And some of the highlights for that were really around resilience for disaster and planning, and adaptation, and some of the things we were hearing today, rapid urbanization. But for the depression overall, it's really the ability to be able to enforce the regulations, to be able to develop and implement the local plans. But we also see continuing professional development, having the lack of resources to do the work, and sometimes the lack of government support or patronage. We've been doing it this way. We know how to do it. The elected representatives are afraid to take risks. Or you saw the bottom one, right? Lack of respect for the profession. Always a barrier to overcome. And then, of course, with educational institutes, one of our partners in the work that we've been doing when I get to the Commonwealth Sustainable Cities Initiative is the Association of Commonwealth Universities. And, some of the areas that are going to undergo the most urbanization are the areas that don't have educational facilities right now, or very sparse. So they do need support, or they need help building those educational facilities so that on the ground, planners can be fostered in the local community to be able to respond to their own needs. So there's that slide again. So just to get to close to wrap up, there is a couple more sort of how are we doing on the SDG pieces. But really quickly, the priority here is building planning capacity in countries experiencing rapid urbanization, partnership with education and planning institutions and industry. Her Excellency spoke about it's got to be intersectoral, interdisciplinary, interjurisdictional. Now is the time to think quite broadly and open that tent to make sure that we're working across areas. And then build momentum. And that's what I feel, like I said, starting here today, that we are, there is some momentum. I can feel it. And building on those best practices. And that's why this event is so important. And we learn from our mistakes. It's not that we haven't been trying to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. It's that it takes time to learn how to plan differently, to learn how to be sustainable, to learn how to be net zero, to challenge the status quo, to have the courage and to have the relationships with elected representatives and the rest of civil society to be able to make these changes. So though we may be falling short, I'm quite confident in the years to come that those numbers in terms of how we're doing on the SDGs, especially as all of us work together and we see how our work connects back to the whole, we'll start to see these improve. And then these are just some examples of what we're talking about on the ground. And Her Excellency spoke about seeing those who in COVID not even be able to sanitize their hands because of limited access to water. It's because of situations like this where we don't have individuals who understand how to build complete, sustainable, quality communities, that are inclusive and accessible for all. But you can see as we kind of go through, some are learning. And when we talk about resilience and we talk about adaptive planning, and we heard one of the examples talk about being able to prepare for the climate extremes that we're experiencing. These are some pictures of that. So you can see some contrasts of the way we were doing it, the way we're trying to do it, but there needs to be some supports there. So with that is the call to action. And so the Commonwealth local government, the Commonwealth Association of Architects, of course, the Commonwealth Association of Planners, where I represent, as well as the Association of Commonwealth Universities, in partnership with the Princess Foundation and the Rwanda government, have a call to action, and you can access that on our website, which I didn't put in the slide because that would have been really smart. Instead, I made it more complicated on myself. But I think somebody's going to put it in the chat, but it's CommonwealthSustainableCities.org. So that's CommonwealthSustainableCities.org. Invite you to go there and learn more about the call to action. Because really what that is all about is everything that I've been talking about, but the fact that each of us can make a difference. And I think RTPI should be very proud of its international strategy, its COVID recovery response and the work that's being rolled out right now, because it's those sorts of initiatives that are part of the call to action. So if you're a member of RTPI, or you're a member of the engineers or the architects or the landscape architects or any of those other organizations, talk to them about how can we get involved. We do need need support around continuous professional development and being able to have those networks. There's the big sort of crescendo in the near future is the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting that'll be happening in June, and that's where we'll be informing local government policy and taking a number of recommendations and policy pieces forward through this work. Also giving out presentations. We've been taking the presentation just to raise the awareness so people understand kind of it's not just so much about getting it right in our own backyard, is that the reality is we can have perfectly net zero communities here, or I'm from Canada, in Canada or wherever, but that's not going to change climate change if we're not looking at the whole. You know, so how do we balance working after our own country's needs and our global needs too? So with that, again, it's a real honor to be here. I sincerely appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and what a fabulous debut, I think, certainly on the international stage in your new role. You should be very pleased, and it's great to have Commonwealth Association of Planners represented here. The RTPI is a very proud member of CAP and looks forward to supporting more on all of what you talked about. You segued neatly into Canada, actually, because we now move very swiftly on to the president of the Canadian Institute for Planners. Delighted now to introduce you to Dan Huang. Dan, over to you. Let's watch the film.
Good day from Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, located on the unceded traditional territories of the Lekwungen people, represented today by the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. My name is Dan Huang, and I'm the president of the Canadian Institute of Planners, which represents over 8,000 members across Canada, providing research, support, and advocacy for our professional planners and to the communities in which they serve. We are also proud to collaborate with the Commonwealth Association of Planners, the Global Planners Network, and all of our international partners to support and promote best practices in accordance with the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, of which sustainable cities and communities plays an integral part. With that, we are pleased to be taking part in this session, The Race to Net Zero, in support of our colleagues at the Royal Town Planning Institute. In Canada, like in most parts of the world, greenhouse gas emissions from transportation and buildings generally comprise the largest share of impacts. These two sectors are greatly impacted by the work of community planners and urban designers. In 2017, CIP endorsed its policy on climate change planning, providing a framework for supporting national climate change objectives for the built, natural, and social environments. CIP regularly conducts national benchmarking surveys of professional planners to better understand the profession's needs with respect to climate change planning. Some of the high-level findings of the 2019 survey were that planners' awareness had significantly grown over the last few years. However, competing priorities was cited as the main barrier to incorporating a climate change lens into planning work. In order to overcome these barriers and celebrate successes, CIP provides an annual award for planning excellence for climate change planning. This year's award went to the District of Saanich, not far from where I live, for their climate plan for a 100% renewable and resilient Saanich. The plan calls for the municipal government to lead by example to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from municipal operations to 50% of 2007 levels by 2025, and to achieve net zero GHG emissions from municipal operations by 2040. Priorities for investments in the community include increased investment in active transportation to reduce both territorial and consumption-based emissions, accelerate personal transportation electrification by developing an electric mobility strategy, convert all oil heating systems to renewable systems by 2030 or sooner, and double the rate of planting trees to enhance the urban forest for increased carbon sequestration and other ecosystem services. These municipal policies are supported and guided at the provincial level through the British Columbia Energy Step Code, which will require all new construction to be net zero ready by 2032. The National Building Code of Canada is similarly moving towards this outcome by 2030. As an organization, CIP began tracking its own carbon emissions, identifying opportunities for reductions, and we have been net neutral since 2019. The race to net zero is a necessary and critical pathway if we are to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals in this decade of action. The Canadian Institute of Planners is committed to being a global partner in this effort by providing science-based policy research, local and senior government advocacy, and best practices support for community planners and allied professionals in creating on-the-ground solutions. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Dan, and a round of applause also for you in the room, and to all of our friends and colleagues in Canada. You're all most very welcome. We're now moving on to our next guest panellist. I'm delighted we have here in person with us today Martina Huvara, who is from ISOCARP, that is the International Society for City and Regional Planners. Martina, you're most very welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I am a strategic planner. I'm based here in the UK. I'm in private practice. I'm the director of my own small company. But I'm also an active member of the International Society of City and Regional Planners, which is an opening to the world of what's happening in planning around the world. I also work internationally, and that was my reason to join the society in the first place. Today my feet are sore, my head is full. I've been in the COP26 events, one after another, day after day, hardly eating or eating on the go between one thing and another. And so I don't know how coherent I will be, but surely enthusiastic, because I think there is a lot of energy and a lot of sense of purpose. There is obviously a great need for action, everybody knows that, but at least there is consensus and a cohesive sense of direction for that. But there is also the awareness that even with all of the pledges, even with the pledges done last week, even if they were all successfully implemented, which of course everybody doubts that they will be, still we will not be in the safe zone. We will not be close to being safely within the boundaries that avert disaster. We know that we need to do a lot more, and we know that cities need to play a big part of it. And that is, we have to realize, and us as planner before anybody else, but it's everybody's business. We have to realize that the cities of tomorrow will be very different. The world of tomorrow will be very different. We cannot go on and develop and think and behave and have our lifestyles the same. I was talking yesterday to the landlord of the bed and breakfast where I'm staying, and he says, oh yes, I'm sure that in the future I will go out to do my shopping, but remember to put sandbags to close, in case a flash flood comes at any time. It could happen at any time. That could change the way we behave and the way we conceive our lives. And if that changes here, a lot more, the change will be a lot stronger in other countries. Without changing the way cities are structured, and without making a radical change in the conception of cities, in the way we plan cities, we are not going to make the contribution, cities will not make the contribution that they need to make to take that target down and to go back into the safe zone of the 1.5 degrees, and even less if possible. That means that we cannot wait for technologies to come in 20 years' time and be adopted only in richer countries for a very long time. We cannot wait for technologies that are not yet invented or cannot be mainstream and scaled up. We have to start working now with what we have now, with the tools we have now, and the Sustainable Development Goals provided a fantastic framework, the new urban agenda. I think I was part of the discussions with the ISOCARP that put it together. I need to go back and revisit that now and see, with all of this, of the discussions today, in this past week, what it means. But We also have to realize that within the COP26, the theme of cities was not one of the prominent ones. And that we have to acknowledge. That is partially our fault as professionals. We are on the last day of the talk. We do not have celebrity ambassadors. I've seen actors and, in these past few days, Idris Elba declaring that agriculture is sexy. We need something like that for planning as well. So the task force for the future of cities that the UN Habitat has been talking about, it cannot come any sooner. It should have been here already. We should have a much stronger voice, exactly because without addressing cities properly and with equity and fairness, we are not going to get anywhere near the targets we need to achieve. Also, we have to, I don't like very much personally the word global south and global north. They seem to be a divide, they're like we were in two different worlds. But let's, for sake of simplicity, I would really think that that's a good shortcut for the moment. We have to realize that there is a dramatic difference in priority and in way of addressing things between the advanced economies of the north and the cities and the communities of the south. Kelly's graphs show that dramatically in a difference between emissions and impact, the countries at risk and the countries that are the emitters. For us in the north, in the global north, so to speak, the priority is really trying to mitigate our emissions, our level of emissions. And the strategies of our governments has been very much on investing in technology, trying to protect the voters' lifestyles, trying to pretend that change is not really coming. We are going to drive an electric car, but we are going to just behave just the same. Nothing is going to change. That narrative is not necessarily helpful. In the Global South, the priority is that of adaptation, is that of, with few resources, with working with the grassroots, is to adapt to a different lifestyle and a different way of living and be prepared for disasters. So these two strategies need to come together, need to be one and be complementary to each other. And now I will tell you a very quick story, which is not one that I know directly, but is part of the ISOCAP family from a think tank called Unicity. That is the story of Albay, the province of Albay in the Philippines. Albay has been the province, the region, has been affected by sea level rise, typhoons, winds, floods, and landslides, one after the other. We have seen so many of these disaster movies, disaster clips in the COP26, and if you look at the Al Gore presentation that is on the website, you will see one after the other of that. That led in the early 2000s to mass internal migrations, thousands and thousands of people moving from one place to another. And that prompted the province to rethink the whole of the way they were managing their region. And one of the aspects was the urban development and urban code. And that was interesting because it's like 15 years ago. It's a relatively old project. So there is 15 years of data of what that has achieved. And that was the urban development code and the urban regulations were developed in 2006. And they were designed to mainstream climate resilience and climate adaptation within the planning system. For each aspect of flood, increased, additional water, what are the aspects of land use policy and land use management that has an impact with that category. And everything has been matched one by one, and the code has been written on that basis. That led to national legislation and a Climate Act, which is only 1 year after the UK. The UK are so proud of our Climate Act and our Climate Commission. The Climate Commission of the Philippines was created in the same year as the UK. And that has then mainstreamed all of across the country this system of planning regulation that takes into account the effect and impacts of climate change. But not only that, has also linked to education. Education, not only what is climate change, but how you need to live with the threat of climate change. What do you need to do? How do you conduct a business? How can you be successful with a small business and no additional resources from the government? Be successful in a situation of crisis. So in 10 years, this is the study that my colleague Taisokar undertook. Forestation increased by 7.5%. Mangrove forests were developed. A lot of children were educated and they knew what to do. And the irrigation patterns had changed. So a real transformation happened through education, partnerships, and the use of planning, the effective use of planning. So I think that this, why did I bring this story? What is the moral of this story? The story is, for us, we have to learn from these early adopters. They are not necessarily the receivers of our foreign aid. They are the leaders in a lot of solutions that we have not really even experimented with. And so going forward as planners, first of all, I really think we have to realize these are no times for business as usual. These are times for accelerating action. We have to realize that there is no real government agenda or international agenda as yet. I really hope that UN Habitat will, with the task force, will provide one for the climate change adaptation and mitigation together, and together with all of the other aspects of the climate change agenda. And collaboration. I think Chris, that was here with me at COP, told me yesterday, we go to every discipline, and every discipline is the essential one that can resolve everything. We have agriculture is essential to resolve climate change. Resolving aviation is essential for climate change. Well, cities are also essential, but they're not the only one, but we are essential too. And we have to really roll up our sleeves and realize that we have no time to waste. Thank you.
Martina, thank you so much for really bringing that reality check, I think, if nothing else, to all of us into plain sight. We're now moving on to our last, but certainly not least, speaker. We're going to another continent virtually. So it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Darren Crombie, who is the National President of the Planning Institute of Australia. So let's watch the film. Thank you.
Thank you to the Royal Town Planning Institute, the Global Planners Network, and the Commonwealth Association of Planners for the opportunity to provide a message to this important event. It's heartening to know that there in Glasgow, there's a gathering of planners getting together to discuss the vital role of our profession in the race to net zero. My name's Darren Crombie, and I'm the President of the Planning Institute of Australia. The Institute in Australia represents more than 5,000 planners, and climate change is the Institute's top policy priority. We've been working closely with our members around this vast nation with our Climate Conscious Planning Systems campaign. This campaign empowers planners to advocate for the reforms that are needed to allow every planning decision and every planning strategy to address the climate crisis. Here in Australia, this crisis is not an abstract concept. Our country is getting hotter and drier. We have major cities like Perth in Western Australia facing systemic urban water supply issues as it adapts to predicted long-term decline in rainfall. Our coastal zone, where about 85% of our population lives, is increasingly becoming inundated, and we see floods, cyclones and droughts getting worse. Our bushfire seasons, which have always been a part of life in southern Australia, are becoming longer, they're becoming more intense, and they're now affecting places that have not previously seen bushfire threats. Every Australian has a story of how natural disaster has affected their lives or the lives of those they love. I live in Queensland, where natural disasters like floods and cyclones, which are being exacerbated by the effects of climate change, are so common that we have a permanent disaster reconstruction authority. Our members understand just what a changing climate means for our country and our people. Unfortunately, as the international community's probably noticed, our politics, particularly at the national level, is held captive by a fear of action on climate change. It's been commonplace for industry groups, community organisations, our state and local governments, and our businesses to be well ahead of our federal government on climate action. As a professional association here in Australia, we're working alongside all of those groups where the federal government is lagging behind. As I mentioned earlier, the Planning Institute here in Australia has launched a campaign in all 8 Australian states and territories for planning reform to ensure that planning strategy, policy settings, and the regulatory tools that we rely on are focused on climate change and climate action. These campaigns call for every state and territory government, where our planning systems are legislated and based, to deliver a range of critical actions to future-proof our systems. Each state and territory has a planning act, and all of these need a legislated goal to address climate change. And our strategic planners need the guidelines, the modelling, and the frameworks to help them plan for human settlements and our natural systems, so that these can endure in a future impacted by climate change. We need to think really hard about the consequences of approving any further coal mines in Australia, and we need to work really hard to prevent further mass land clearing of the Australian bush. This will be politically challenging, as I'm sure it will cause hardship for some people, particularly in the regional parts of our country. But we need our national political leaders to act in the greater public interest, and we need them to act now. As a large landmass exposed to the elements, we should be a renewable energy powerhouse, and we should be making the planning and construction of these projects as simple as possible. As our history of cyclones, fires and floods show us, we need plans to ensure that our communities are resilient, and we do have a network of resilience strategies across Australia. With nearly a quarter of emissions in Australia coming from our built environment, we need carbon performance metrics for every building type. Our planning systems are immensely powerful, and they can help deliver for this future. I'm really proud that our institute has identified these policy opportunities, and we're working alongside our expert members to drive reform. I'd like to thank all of you who've gathered there this evening in Glasgow. As always, it's wonderful to be part of an international community of like-minded professionals. And I look forward to opportunities in the future to discuss these really important and critical issues with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Darren, Planning Institute of Australia, and to any of our colleagues watching from down under. Some of you may just be getting up very early in the morning. You are, of course, all very welcome, and thank you for your important contribution. And now, we were due to have half an hour for questions, but because we've had such a fantastic panel, we've only got 15 minutes for questions. So what I'm going to do now with the technology, firstly, thank you very much for all of you for submitting your questions on Slido. Of course, we've got far too many to get through. But before you start all disappearing off out the door, may I remind you that we are going to have a networking session afterwards. So please do stick around. But I'm going to ask each of our panellists, and if I may, panel, in reverse order, I'm going to choose a question and put you on the hot spot. Not really, because these are all, we're amongst friends here. These are all talking points, and I'm going to ask each of our speakers to respond to a question of no more than a couple of minutes, please, each of you, because we are up against it with the time. But I can see via the clever Slido app the questions that have attracted most attention. So hopefully you won't be too disappointed with my selection of questions. My first one for Martina, as I said in reverse order. how can natural solutions be promoted more strongly to support long-term adaptation to climate change? So how can we support natural solutions more strongly? And I know you work across the world, so perhaps you may share a couple of examples there. And can I ask you to return to the spot I'm standing in now so that we can hear you all, our colleagues and friends can hear you around the world. Thank you, Martina.
Now that I have this, I'm never going to go away. The nature-based solution is one of the hot topics, and they require a different mindset. First of all, the mindset that engineering and technology is not always the best solution, that learning from allowing nature to restore itself and regenerate itself, arriving at this regenerative environment, and that is the cap, that is the target of planning, if you want. You know, we cannot develop when it starts to encroach in that regenerative power of nature. That is a complete change of mindset. Is a different relation with floodplains, is a different relation with coastal areas, is no longer the best view on the coast, is the highest density development. It needs complete reset of the thinking. But there are other challenges. First of all, nature-based solutions need a lot of community ownership and local stewardship. Because they're not engineered solution, hard solution, they have to have the buy-in and the input of the community. So they're co-created solutions necessarily. Second, big problem that has been talked a lot last week. I don't know much about it, but I learned about it last week. Obviously, a lot of the assessment methodologies that we have are based on hard solutions. We need hard facts. We need to predict what's going to happen in 75 years. And therefore, it's much harder. And that is also for funding, for example. You know, companies are happy to fund in nature-based solutions as long as they have the hard data for it. And that is the challenge that we have to resolve still. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martina. We now move on to our next question. Great speech by Kelly Moore. So you've guessed you're up next. Great speech by Kelly Moore on planning across the Commonwealth. Did the survey find any deficit in climate literacy? And how can we champion more awareness? Kelly, your 2 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think it's an excellent question. And the answer is yes. It has identified that. Even if I look back to when I graduated, and I'll age myself slightly, 25 years ago, we weren't talking about climate resilience and climate literacy. So there's still a lot of planners who have been practicing for a long time, including myself, who have a lot of learning to do. But if we kind of take what we identified here in the areas whether it's Europe or North America, and so on, where we discussed that those areas have a lot of capacity in the planning realm, and there's still deficiencies. There are then those deficiencies in that resiliency knowledge and climate planning is further challenged in other areas where some of those professionals may not exist. We do, though, just to speak to Canada, have programs and university programs around the climate change, and there's sort of new programs coming alongside planners, and not everyone is taking that track. So that sort of speaks to sort of that interdisciplinary knowledge and planning programs, being able to offer both sort of the built environment as well as the climate policy changes courses that are available. So certainly more work to do on that. And we are hoping to do another survey so we can put more focus on that next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. As we move on, the next question is for President Wei Yang I know in Way's presidency, one of the things she's enjoyed greatly is speaking with younger people, younger professionals, and thinking about the future education. So this question is right up your street. I am just starting my career as a planner and am passionate about climate issues. Where can I start in working to build my career around both of these paths? Way, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question. I think for young planners, how get the both paths?
Yes, I'll repeat it again. Yes, so I'm starting my career as a planner and I'm passionate about climate issues. Where can I start in working to build my career path, my career around both of these paths? So how can I be a planner and passionate about climate action and climate change?
Thank you. Because the reason I confused, because I thought it's the same issue, so why we separate them? So I think planners, we deal with climate issues naturally because we work with natural environment, we think about the people, we care about community. So that's the one issue. So definitely don't think about that's two issues. And actually, recently, because I had several presidential visits. One of the visits I had was to Yorkshire, and I spoke with one of the past planners. She was an RTPI member before, and now she's a climate action officer in the council. And then she said she's not an RTPI member anymore. I was really, really surprised because she said actually because the climate change actions and then the technologies and everything are moving so fast, she doesn't feel being a membership of RTPI actually supporting her enough. So actually I was very, very surprised. I think we should welcome all the environmental specialists to be an RTPI member, to be a planner. So I think there are lots of rooms we need to do. So think about how we can advance our profession to really embrace all these thinkings and those future thinking into our profession. I think that's something we need to definitely work on. And also we should attract more young people to join our profession. And I feel sometimes we may be too narrowed on how we should do things. I spoke with also young people, teenagers, some of them as young as 11 years old. I found actually children, they were naturally born planners because they asked some fundamental questions. So why the world is like this? Why we cannot do it better? I think really, as planners, we should be very imaginative, think about how we can make our world a better place for our future generations. So never think about, this is a textbook, tell me what to do. This is a policy, tell me what to do. I think we should be always challenging about how we can make the world a better place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Wei Yang. And now, no pressure. Your Excellency, we have an excellent question for you. How can we gain meaningful, high-level political support and, crucially, the required resources that we need for planning to fill the global professional vacuum? And I may just add an extra bit on that using my chair's privilege. What is the role for UN Habitat in all of this? Maemuna, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. This is very difficult to answer, and you added another one. Yes, I think let's start that with what is happened now. Yeah, we are planners, and I'm also an urban planner. When I hit UN Habitat, what I would like to see is that how planners playing a role, and I make a lot of noise. And one of the areas is to attract the global needs that I realized that in the head of the state or even the head of the government, when they have their intervention in the global program, they very much link it to sustainable urbanization, very much link it into, very less link it into the sustainable development or not even planning. So on that score, I used to push when I have a meeting with the Secretary Generals and all that. I said that how come that is the head of the government and head of the state don't really relate the new urban agenda when they make their speech, even when you discuss about the climate change. And I think one of our colleagues mentioned about the new urban agenda and the SDG. So on that, I would like to announce to you that due to our, not only me, it's also together with other planners and other local governments push, that the General Assembly has made a decision to have a high-level meeting. I think this one I would like to get planners also input. The high-level meeting on the 28th of April 2022 to discuss to what extent that all the member states implement the new urban agenda to achieve the SDG. So, and UN Habitat have been asked by the President of General Assembly to be the Secretariat. This is the, indirectly, what is the role of planners? Why our leaders, they don't link it, just take COP26, I think one of the colleagues mentioned, they don't really link about the COP26, the climate change to cities very much. Why this happened? Or maybe from the Commonwealth the survey just now, maybe lack of planners in that sector, but why? I keep on asking, so that's the reason we put it a paper to the General Assembly to have this meeting Kyoto +5. Yeah. So on that score, if you look into the common agenda of our Secretary General, we, UN Habitat, together with our colleague, managed to, through the Future Cities Task Force, managed to put one suggestion in the common agenda of Secretary General, I think suggestion number 63, to form the advisory group for local and regional government, because the cities is not at the center of the negotiation table. And whereas just now you said that, you also mentioned that 65% of the 169 target of the Sustainable Development Goal in the cities. And where is the role of planners to push? And for UN Habitat, we'll try our best to bring this matter to at the global level. And I would like also to invite you all. There will be the World Urban Forum in Katowice, 26th to 30th of June 2022. I would like to have a professional assembly, maybe the planners, the engineers, the architects, when you talk about the future cities, and maybe the investors, the development partners, they call it. I feel that I would like, I intend to have one professional assembly. So maybe this is a time for us to bring in our knowledge, to really, I would like to see that after the World Urban Forum 11, we will come up with a document. These are the criteria, these are the way, these are the how to really create a recovery, really create a green city, green recovery, green infrastructure. So we are lacking of the how. We have all the what, we have all the whom, but we are lack of the how. So I think with planners, with all of you, I invite you to Katowice, and also please you can email me what do you want to see in high level meeting on the 28th of April in New York, and also we have the call to action by the Commonwealth, by His Royal Highness Prince Charles. I was there. I was one of the speakers to put forward the urbanization, and I saw that he put it down when I think he's gave it on the 29th of October. So let's work together. Even though I'm already there, my heart is still urban planners. So you can reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And I should have given full credit. The question was asked very happily from Sean Kelly, who's part of the Scottish Young Planners Network. So isn't that fabulous, Sean? Are you here in person? Give us a wave. There we go. So that's a question from the future, if you like. And my goodness, congratulations. You've teased out a whole hive of information there and dates that we're all looking forward to. So that really was fabulous. And I'm so sorry for those of you who have asked questions both here in person and around the globe, that we're not going to get to those. But I didn't want to really ask any of our speakers to wrap up too early, because the quality of the content has just been quite phenomenal. And that goes for those who joined us in person, but also who took the time to do some excellent pre-records. So please, can you join me in showing your sincere thank you to all involved. So it is my great pleasure to ask you to stick around and take this precious time to do some informal networking, those of you who are here in person. Those of you who are online, before you go, I think what we've witnessed here this evening is a real masterclass in the global response that planning is doing and can do in the future, in the race to net zero. We are all absolutely in this race, but I think we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to bring parity in that race. And you've certainly heard some clues tonight as to where those of us who are represented in the global north, and I agree with some of the speakers, it's not a great term, but my goodness, there isn't there capacity within the global south, and a responsibility for all of us to come up with smart, efficient ways on how we can help those communities who most need that help. I think working beyond the silos, working beyond our boundaries, we can and we will get things done. Planners can be innovative, we can be resilient, but I think most proudly what our profession does, perhaps better or as well as to other professions, is we are very collaborative. So thank you so much to all of those who have been involved. Please do stick around. For those of you who made the effort to join in from home or the office or wherever you are around the globe, thank you so much for what has been a truly unique and really heartwarming evening. Thank you so much.